Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Voice of the Customer Session 201. We've got a lot of content to get through, so I'd ask if you could actually hold your questions towards the end of the session. Hopefully we'll have time to be able to address anything that we have then. My name's Craig Hutchinson. I'm from Ausgrid, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about our intranet solution. So thanks all for coming, and I'd like to introduce you now to Tyson. Tyson was the project manager on the solution, and he came with an agency background, which gave us a bit of a different insight to actually delivering an intranet to standard IT.
Thanks. So we're just coming off the back of a successful SharePoint 2010 project to implement the wire at Ausgrid. And really we just wanted to take a chance to talk you guys through the process that we followed, point out some of the things that made that project successful, and to identify or give you guys a bit of a heads up as to a few of the speed humps that you should try and avoid along your own journey. As Craig mentioned, we've been working closely together at Ausgrid. Craig's actually a solution architect, and he's basically the practice manager for our SharePoint practice at Ausgrid, and involved in both the strategic direction of our solutions and also the day-to-day implementation of our projects.
So we're going to split the agenda into two halves. Basically, I'll talk about the implementation side, so the Ausgrid ecosystem, the delivery mechanism, and then a little bit about some of the takeouts from a technical perspective. Tyson's going to talk about user-centric design and actually do a hands-on demo of the system, all being well, and some practical steps to take away to begin your own intranet implementations.
So who are Ausgrid and what do we do? Can I get a quick hands up of anyone who's heard of Ausgrid? Sweet. Much more than I thought. Those others of you who haven't heard of Ausgrid, you may know us by our previous name, Energy Australia. So essentially, Ausgrid, we're responsible for creating and maintaining the electrical infrastructure across Sydney, Central Coast and Hunter region. We basically provide transmission and distribution of electricity across that network through a complex collection of substations, transformers, poles and wires. Basically, our core business is the commissioning of new infrastructure into that electrical network, and then the maintenance and reliability of that to ensure that it's safe and reliable and people can turn on switches and electricity gets to that endpoint. We have about 6,000 staff, and we're the largest employer of apprentices in New South Wales. We had an existing intranet, a little bit about where we came from. We had an intranet which was called eNet. It was built on a combination of Lotus Notes and SAP platforms, and it was an intranet where information was really difficult to find. And when staff actually did manage to find the information, it was often out of date or incorrect. So we were at a point where we had an intranet of little value, and it was probably at a stage where if we were to turn off eNet and replace it with an Excel spreadsheet of names and phone numbers, a number of our users would have actually seen that as an improvement. So we knew we had a long way to go. We had a user base which didn't trust, an intranet which was untrusted, and we knew we had a long way to go to create an intranet which added value to the organisation and demonstrated that intranets can actually provide use and be helpful across an organisation. We also had a SharePoint 2007 trial up and running, which Craig was largely responsible for.
So our starting infrastructure wasn't great. Basically, we had SAP driving our intranet content. In order to manage the load of users hitting the site, we actually front-ended that with a Domino Notes solution, and that was basically just to allow users to look up phone numbers. That was great in that it actually took some of the load away from our SAP servers, but it was really bad because it actually hid all of our intranet content from the users. So we then basically said, well, okay, new solution needed. What sort of technology do we need to work with to deliver that? As Tyson mentioned, we had 2007 in place for running our collaboration space. We had just finished implementing an external website using Sitecore, so that was a contender. And the flavour of the month was still SAP, so we had to obviously consider that as being a rework on that same platform. We engaged an external company to do a market survey for us, and that company also had some insights into other intranet experiences throughout the industry. And they basically went and evaluated those platforms and a few others from Oracle and that sort of thing, and came back with SharePoint 2010 as being the recommended platform. So we thought, that's great. That was the direction that we wanted to go as well, having seen 2010 and we wanted to be able to play. So we got Tyson then involved early on in the project. And as I said, Tyson had worked on external websites in an agency mode. He'd also worked on our external websites. So he knew a bit about how Ausgrid actually managed its content. And he brought some unique approaches to our solution. So Tyson's now going to tell you about the design process.
So early on in the project, I worked really closely with corporate comms, and unlike most of our users, corporate comms did actually have a pretty good idea about where we wanted to go, and that they had a vision on how we could create an intranet that adds value. So basically they had a vision which was around creating an intranet which helps people do their job, which is actually, it's a fantastic vision to have, but it's a really difficult thing to do unless you actually know what people do in order to do their job. So it was a long way from where we were, and we knew that we had a lot of learnings that we needed to do in order to understand our user base a lot better and how they use that information in order to do their job. So we basically went out and did a whole bunch of user research. It's really important when you're speaking to your users not to actually just go about and asking them what stuff do you want from an intranet or how can we make an intranet better. It's really much more important to talk to people and look at what information do you use to do your job and how can we improve access to that information. So we did a whole bunch of work around user surveys, workshops, focus groups, those kind of things. That's really important to actually get out from behind your desk and go and meet with users and speak to them. The other thing that we found really valuable is workplace observation. So you will often find that you get a different response when you ask someone about what systems they use or what processes they use and how information flows from them downstream onto other teams, and actually watching them do that same task. You'll find that what they describe to you and what they actually do are often two very different things. So through things like workplace observation, you need to identify things that work well, identify those pain points, identify areas of their processes and information flows that are cumbersome, and then look for gaps in common needs and ways that you can improve that. I'd like to introduce you guys to Ted. Ted is a pretty typical guy at Ausgrid. He's got an engineering background. He's actually involved in decommissioning some of our substation equipment. Now, Ted, he's very detail-oriented. He's very detail-oriented and has a pretty specific area of expertise and a really strong depth of knowledge in that area. Spends a lot of time with schematics, technical guidelines, standards, and documentation and those kind of things. He's also, he doesn't have a lot of time for kind of that softer side of communication and that corporate comms kind of fluffiness. What he really wants is information and facts, and he needs to be able to digest that quickly and use that as part of his job. Now, Ted's not actually, there's no single Ted at Ausgrid. What there are probably thousands of people who have similar desires and experiences and information needs to Ted. I'd also like to introduce you to Olivia. Olivia is an office worker. She works in the back office at Ausgrid. She does a lot of paper processing, forms processing, organising of meeting rooms and logistics, and really trying to use the contacts of people that she knows in order to get things done. She's got her finger on the pulse, understands the way the organisation works and the people that can help get things done. Now, as you can see by the way that Olivia works and the way that Ted works, they're two very different approaches to information, two very different sets of information needs, and the way that they use that information is very different. So as part of our project, we created a collection of 7 user personas. And what are personas? Personas are essentially fictitious people which you create to represent a real user base. So we created a collection of these personas. It captures a whole bunch of their information needs, their goals, intentions, the way they use that information, and creates and wraps that in a story about the way in which a person of a similar nature would go about doing the same tasks. We also created a persona for a guy called Simon the Skeptic, and that was actually a really important thing for us in recognising that we had a lot of people who were sceptical about the intranet and how it could add value. So it was important for us to create a skeptic persona to address that throughout the entire project. So we were able to refer back to Simon and think, well, how's Simon going to actually see this, or what's going to be Simon's perception of this, and how can we look at taking Simon along that journey and transferring him into one of our other personas where he would more naturally fall. So look, personas are a great way to look at using them at the heart of your decision-making process and trying to make sure that you're making decisions not based on what you or I think is a good idea, but how are your users going to actually use them. And so bringing a lot of those decision-making points back to one or more personas. I remember there was a time back in about December of last year, we were sitting in a project meeting. We had a bunch of people looking at one of the particular ways that a piece of functionality was going to work across the site. And we'd probably spent about the last half an hour with two of these subject matter experts really arguing or debating as to how this particular component was going to work. And we were getting nowhere, we were getting bogged down. So we took a break, we sent them off to get coffee and get some fresh air. And when we came back to the room, I remember sitting there and seeing Kate walk in the room towards us. And she walked in wearing a high-vis vest. She had a hard hat on, was carrying some schematics and had drawn on a pencil moustache. And she was looking like a female version of Ted. And when Kate actually sat down, I don't think she actually said anything to the other guys, but it really did hit home to us that we'd spent the last half an hour really debating what you or what I think is a great design idea and how something should work, where at the end of the day it really came down to Ted. How's Ted going to use this component? How does Ted, as a data-driven, factual, detail kind of guy, how is he going to consume that information and how do we design it that makes sense for him? So look, when personas are worked well, they should be used at the center of every decision and really do help you to take that personal opinion out of the design process and come back to your users and how they're going to use your system. We spent a lot of time looking at how we were going to arrange and collate the information across the intranet. And we'd made that decision to make an intranet that was very task-focused and helping staff to get the information they need to do their job. And move away from that organisational siloed approach. So we did a bunch of paper-based card sorting, which really allowed us to look at... did you want me to stop, or is that... So looking at ways that people logically group information together. So trying to break away from that siloed structure and looking at what's the best way for us to arrange this information in a way that makes sense to our users. So we did that both using paper-based card sorting and also some online tools, which really allowed us to go out to a broader number of users and start to get a wider opinion on the way that information should be arranged. And what that ended up with, we were able to do a whole bunch of pattern matching on coming up with a tiered information structure, which really did represent the way that most users would look for information across the intranet. So yeah, it was a really important step for us to trying to create that information structure which made sense to users and help them find that information they needed to do their job. Wireframes. We created a collection of wireframes. If any of you guys missed Shane Morris's talk yesterday on prototyping, he went through a whole bunch of detail around wireframes and prototyping, and it's really worth downloading that presentation if you didn't get a chance to see it. Wireframes, what they really are is they're a set of drawings or a set of plans which will help you look at the way in which your site or your application is going to function. The best thing that it does, it allows you to focus on how components are going to interact, how they're going to work together, and allows you to step away from that design process and really concentrate on the information flows and the interaction between those parts of the site. Look, they can be lo-fi using paper and whiteboards, or you can move into electronic tools like Visio, PowerPoint, Balsamiq, OmniGraph, tools like that. And look, when you get into some of those online tools or electronic tools, they really start to move into some of that prototyping and area of user testing. I'll just jump back here for a second. One of the great things about the wireframes that they provided for us is they were an excellent talking point from the business-based project team, who I were working very closely with, and both our technical team and our graphic design team. It really gave us that physical, tactile thing that we could stand around and talk about, or sit down in a meeting room and talk about these particular wireframes and how things were going to work. It really was great to be able to use them as a talking point and to clarify each of the components so that we had very clear direction on how the components were going to be implemented and how the design needed to reflect that. Does anyone know who this guy is? Oh, well done. Come and see me after. I'll probably have something small for you in a box of goodies. Jacob or Jakob. Jakob Nielsen is probably considered by most as the godfather of usability. He has a PhD in human-computer interaction and about 80-odd patents in usability and making the internet easy to use. He did a whole bunch of analysis around usability testing, and he actually came up with this formula which identifies the number of usability problems that will come out during usability testing. The formula doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I like the pretty pictures version a little bit more. Basically what it does is it talks to you about, as you run usability testing with more and more users, how many usability problems or the percentage of usability problems that you're going to find. And look, there's some really striking truths in this. The first one is pretty blatantly obvious, but it's really important. 0 users gives you 0 insights. If you don't undertake any usability insights at all, you're going in blind. And look, when you even move to just a single user, what you've identified is about 30% of the total usability problems that are in your application. So even a little bit of data is actually astounding. Then the next bit, so basically what happens is as you jump to a second, third, and as you add more users into your tests, what you're going to find is you're going to have them highlight some things that you already knew about, some things that the second guy had already told you about. So as you get up to your 12 and 15 people, you're really just getting such, the number of new insights that you're learning is so increasingly small. So what Jakob actually tells you and what we followed in our usability testing is really that idea about running multiple smaller sets of usability testing. Don't run usability testing as a single bulk process at the end. Use it in smaller chunks throughout your entire project, using it with 2 or 3 or 5 users, but using it throughout your project, learning from the things that you're finding, incorporating them back into your design, and making those changes as you go. I'd like to give you guys probably 5 top takeaways around our user-centric design process and things that I'd like you to take away. At the core of this is really understanding your users, really making sure that you understand the guys who you're building the system for and how they're going to use that and the way in which they process information so that you can present it in a way that makes sense to them and makes their job easier. The second part is about creating and using personas. One, it's incredibly important to create them, but it's probably even more important to use them. Don't just file them away and forget about them. Create a persona in a way that gives it a life throughout your entire project. And try and get to a point, we definitely got to a point where we had people in our entire project team who would talk about personas as second nature. They'd talk about how Ted was going to do things or how Olivia was going to perceive information. And so really about trying to create a life that sits behind that persona. Focus on task-based activities, creating that intranet where people go to do things rather than just go to look at stuff. So focusing on the tasks that they need to do their job and making that easier for them. Usability testing doesn't have to be massive. It doesn't have to be a big, expensive process. Do it small, do it iteratively, and do it throughout the duration of your project. And the last one is really about putting the user at the center of every decision. It's probably profoundly important to us about making those decisions, not based on what you or I think and how we as a project team think that this should work, or we as IT professionals, or we as the comms team, but really about creating something that really works for your users. This user-centric design stuff isn't rocket science. It's actually pretty well documented. There's plenty of books and articles and all kinds of things on it. And here's a couple of things that really helped us on our journey, a few books, and they're well worth getting your hands on and using them as part of your own projects. Can anyone remember any of the personas that we had? Ted, the tech specialist. I know James, who wrote those 2 books on the left, and James has actually given us a couple of those books. So if you want to see us afterwards, we could probably hook you up. They're 2 excellent resources that will help you along your way. Look, that's enough about the design process. Craig's going to talk a bit more about how the rubber actually hits the road.
Thanks, Tyson. So, at Ausgrid, we basically have 5 SharePoint farms running. We have the web graphs on the far side, which is an externally hosted system that we allow our power users and our advanced and large power users to come into the system and find out information about their consumption. The SGSC implementation, that's the Smart Grid, Smart City work, has a dual farm, and the users internally create data and assets that goes through a whole bunch of workflows around getting user information attached to it, getting documents classified, and then they go through an approval and a publishing process, and then they're delivered out onto the external website, and then users log into that system and then consume information based on their role within the environment. We've mentioned our 2007 collaboration space, and that's where our projects and team spaces live. And so all that was very cool. Along come the wire. So we then built a new farm, a SharePoint 2010 implementation. And that's currently servicing about 3,000 users, soon to service about 6. And that's the environment that we've created where we're going to house, where we house the wire, but also where we're going to move most of our collaboration space in the future. So having looked at that part of the system, this is the actual detail of the farm that we're using to host the wire. Spread across 2 data centres. A whole bunch of application servers. Currently we have 2 of those application servers housing the front end, 1 in each data centre. Our routers basically run round robin to spread the load across both of the implementations. All of our users, when they log in, are actually all coming in through our Active Directory, so they're all actually internal users rather than any external users, so they're authenticated against our AD. They're all using IE8. IE8 is the approved browser for our environment. It's deployed on the standard machine. And importantly, all of these servers are enterprise CALs, so it's all enterprise systems. You notice our SQL servers. We have 2 clusters, an active and passive cluster. It's a standard 15-minute log ship between the 2 of those. And again, in the future, what we want to be able to do is extend that cluster so we can actually have it running hot across both sites. So the home page of all of our browsers points to the wire. That means that when the wire loads, it has to be a pretty quick experience, because every time a user pops up a browser, there it is. So our metric was that we had to be able to load a page, the home page particularly, in less than 3 seconds. And from the work that we'd done, we knew that we were going to get about 88 requests per second at peak time. So that was the sort of metric we had to work towards. So we did a lot of performance testing during the project cycle. And with that, we were actually able to achieve our 3-second page load time with about 100 requests per second. So we've got enough capacity as well to be able to deal with some future growth. Some other notes about the implementation here. The service accounts that we used on the farms are all configured with least privilege access. It's an obvious thing to say, but wasn't sort of obvious when the service accounts were all set up. And so that was an important thing for us, as well as also making sure that all of our firewalls and routers are configured to have an absolute minimum number of ports open. We also did some interesting things with our antivirus to try and get some performance out of the system as well. We had to turn off the scan across the 14 hives, so all of the layout pages and everything else are no longer scanned. We also turned off the antivirus file checking on our database servers on the temporary directory and also on the database files themselves. Again, that sounds like an obvious thing to do, but talking to our infrastructure guys and actually convincing them that it was an obvious thing to do was a bit more of a challenge. So delivering the solution. But the first thing you have to do, surround yourself with an awesome team. We basically used a blend of resources, in addition to the resources that Tyson was talking about, which were those people who are actually out in the business and working on the design of the system. Technically, we also built up a fairly large team as well. So we basically project management and solution architect, business analysis roles. That'll morph eventually into an intranet management role. We had a test manager, and that was someone who was specifically dealing with performance testing. And then an interface developer, really just the carve of the PSDs and everything else that came out from our graphic design people, and SharePoint skills. We actually wound up with 4 SharePoint people working full-time on the project, who were a mix of both configuration and also development skills. We used external parties to achieve a number of results. That was sort of important because we didn't want to dilute the core focus of the team from actually delivering the solution. there's other things, there's skills that were in those external bodies that we didn't have the need to keep within the organisation, but we definitely needed the quality of what they could deliver to us. So we got some help with running workshops and developing our persona research. Our wireframes and IAs, which we'd actually gone through the effort of creating those, we got them reviewed by third party to make sure there were no obvious gaps in what we were delivering. Again, the graphic design elements that I'd mentioned before. And then technical skills. We used Microsoft partners where appropriate to boost up our SharePoint skill and just to come in and have a quick look through some of our database configuration, those sorts of things as well, just to make sure we had everything up and running and there wasn't anything obvious that we'd missed. That was pretty successful for us, actually. So then the development cycle, basically source code management was an interesting thing for us. We actually didn't have the ability to use the Team Studio environment. We actually used Subversion. So we did all of our source code, asset and package management all using Subversion. That worked pretty well. It actually plugged in pretty nicely to our development environments. It was important for us too that we could actually do package deployment, so we could do hands-off deployment. Having third parties in our environment, we didn't want to give them access to our production servers straight away. And also we wanted to make sure that we had a clean a process that was repeatable. So we could actually deploy the same code assets in the same configuration to each of our environments that we were working across. That was actually important because we had two production environments in the end. We actually had a content entry environment and also the main production, the wire environment. And so we had to make sure that they were identical every deployment. The grooming process for us was, in addition to using the standard SharePoint admin and logging tools, we also put into the site the SharePoint and Google Analytics. And that gave us a lot of information, particularly during launch week, because we'd launched with a lot of new features. Our pages were much more graphically heavy than they had been, and we were actually delivering video and other multimedia assets for the first time. So we needed to make sure we were able to monitor the system to make sure that, you know, with people getting in and playing, that there wasn't anything strange happening. It was also interesting in that the information we're starting to get back from that grooming process, we're now starting to use to improve the system. So more best bets, synonyms for acronyms, and improving the search experience for the users has been a good outcome from that as well. So we structured our environment. It was a little flatter than the normal SharePoint environment. We basically created a whole bunch of site collections so that way we could manage storage more efficiently. And we flattened our sites out across that environment as well with a number of custom pages living in libraries that had basically templated out of the wireframes that Tyson was talking about earlier. That meant, of course, that we actually broke the native SharePoint navigation. So what we did then was to actually create a list to hold all of our navigation items, and then we rendered that list using style sheets to create a mega menu, which was a mechanism that was really favoured by the research that we'd done to show that, you know, with minimum number of clicks, a user could get to any piece of information that they were after. We defined a number of search scopes as well, which basically integrated profiles. We had a Google Search appliance, which was an interesting exercise in integration. We also integrated information out of our notes system and obviously other SharePoint content as well. GSA Federation, not quite as easy as it is in the documentation. It's a little bit challenging. It was important for us that we actually went down the federated path though, rather than just re-indexing the actual content store, because we wanted to make sure that the users who were currently using the system, if they made the same search from within the wire, actually got the same results. There were 3 key web apps as well that we developed, that we created to actually support it. And that, as I mentioned before, content entry we actually pushed to one side so people could begin content entry and stage that content, which was then approved for the actual production wire environment. Profiles was the other key web app that we also built up in that space. Yep. So looking now at the other systems and how they actually hook together. In a minute, you can be rid of me and we'll actually do a live demo of all of this stuff. But basically we have the SharePoint 2007 environment, which is where we created the project sites for the actual management of the project itself. And we had the 2010 space, which we've mentioned, which has got the wire in it, and importantly, search and people scopes. So our profile data was a bit non-standard. Normally, you'd obviously push SharePoint off to have a talk to AD, and you get a lot of information about your people back. Our AD was fairly sparsely populated. It was really used for authentication, and that was about it. So SAP holds all of our human resources information. That information about the activity of the user, that is this person actually valid and live within the organisation, and basically their name, gets pushed into AD. The security system was used to store all of the photographs, and Lotus Notes phone book had a lot of other information, like what their phone number was, where they physically were in the building, and their reporting structure. So we actually had to mash all of that data together, and using some BCS, some of the BCS tools, and also some of our own code, and create profile data out of that. We also, in the multiple search scopes, as mentioned before, we were indexing policies and procedures databases, which were sitting in Lotus Notes, and we integrated into the Google Search Appliance, which was doing a scan of our technical document repository. That was sort of like across all of our environments as well. So we actually had the same setup for both our staging and unit testing, as well as our production environment. So that's enough about the design at the moment, and Tyson's now going to actually show you the system live.
Now we're actually going to run a live demo, hooking back through our VPN back into our production system, the wire. Can we just duck back to that other slide for a sec?
Too quick.
So before we jump in and have a look at it, can I just get everyone to just look up on the ceiling for a second, and just raise your hands in the air, and just repeat with me: demo gods, into your world we sail. Protect us from harm and that awful demo fail. All right. Yes. Here's the wire. So as you can see, it's a fairly non-standard looking set of design components that sit on top of SharePoint 2010. And it was important for us to actually create an intranet which did actually mirror some of the experiences that our staff were having on external websites, and creating something that, in a lot of organisations, intranets are often the poorly looked after cousins, and it was important for us, in order to drive adoption and usability, to create something that did give an on-par experience with a lot of external sites. Couple of core things to point out. So a visual rotator up in the top, driven by a SharePoint list with some jQuery sitting on top, really helps us with some of that corporate comms, that push information. And so it is really important to try and work out that balance between how do you use your intranet for that push information versus the pull content about what I went there for, and that task-based content. We have some core network reliability metrics which are driving into our homepage. Two metrics there around SAIDI and SAFE, which really are the crux of our company and why we do what we do in terms of providing electricity in reliable and so minimizing those outages and the number of outages and the duration of those. As you can see, there's a short news snippets that are being pushed out there through a microblogging type format, which is a good way for us to switch away from some of the more traditional monthly newsletters or weekly email broadcasts, and trying to move our audiences into that environment where you can consume information real time and be provided that as it happens. There's a couple of other tabs there which are for a few of our other corporate communications channels, and for people to be able to pull those. Moving across on the right-hand side, phone book was really important for us, knowing that is the core component that was used on eNet, that we were able to use that phone book in a prominent location and make it easy for people to use, and then more of that task-based functional component sitting on the right-hand side as well. As Craig mentioned earlier, we took that tiered information architecture that we'd looked at through our IA process, and we mapped that into a mega menu, which was important for us to be able to present that second and third tier information to our users from the homepage. So it stops that I'm looking for particular information about getting hold of PPE equipment for safety. Is it going to be in the safety menu? and being able to jump to that second and third tier of information directly from each of our pages. We created a number of different page format or page templates. And Craig's going to jump through a couple of those, just in order to. So there is a depth of content structure here, which has provided us with a number of templates based on both content templates and more landing page type templates. So creating different templates based on the information and the way that it should be presented. So obviously when you have content, if it's content that's largely going to be for TED, it is going to be factual, data-driven snippets of information. If you're providing to somebody who is more, say, of Olivia, the office worker, she consumes information in a different way. So being able to, when you create a piece of content, work out who it is that's going to need this information and present it using the template and the structure that's going to make sense for that persona. We're going to jump in and have a look at people search. We want to jump back to our homepage.
Yep.
In an organisation like ours, we really are a connected organisation of people. It is still quite hierarchical, and people tend to say, David, who's your manager? Who do you work for? And so there really is that understanding about the way in which the hierarchy worked. So we'll jump in just to the people browser first, Craig. It was important for us when we actually were able to reuse the SharePoint 2010 org browser component, pulling all of that information into the intranet in a way that our users had never seen before. So it's a great way for our staff to really start to visualize that org structure and really understand that point of context. When we look at Sharon, who's Sharon's manager, who are Sharon's peers, and who are the people that work below her. So obviously, it is very standard component from a SharePoint point of view, but it took a whole load of processing for us to get all of the information out of those multiple systems in order to feed this single org browser, which gives that seamless user experience. So really, this is probably one of the most talked about components of our new intranet is that people browser, and that really providing that point of context of being able to spot somebody and see where they live in that organisational hierarchy. We'll jump back and we'll do people search. So people search is definitely the most used component of the intranet. It's probably common across most intranets.
David, it's your 15 minutes of fame.
David's here, so if you do feel like saying hello to him, you can do that. So pulling a whole load of the organisational data, as we mentioned, aggregated from multiple information sources, uses the facets and filtering over on the left-hand side to be able to really restrict that number. With 6,000 staff, there's obviously quite a few Davids, and providing that filtering is something very new for our users, providing the ability to restrict that data set of people and be able to target down and find that person that you're after. Coming from a very flat, a very plain text-based people search, this really was a big step forward for us. Couple of interesting things about user profiles. We created a availability control as well, which allows, we have quite a number of people who work part-time in the organisation, so it's really quite helpful in actually being able to identify what days our staff are in the office, and that's obviously controlled in their own user profile, being able to say, oh gee, I haven't been able to get in touch with Helen. Yeah, that's because Helen works Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So it's a small component, but really quite helpful in an organisation like ours. We also managed some presence integration with our notes same time system, so people can actually, all right, fine, I need to get in touch with David, I need to speak to him about some of the ask me about components, cool, he's involved in SharePoint, and to be able to invoke that chat directly from the intranet. Where are we going next? What do we want to have a look at?
Well, let's have a look at some first aid.
Yeah, the other thing that was a big change for us, although in our existing intranet it was really about, I'm looking for David, how do I find David? What we're starting to move towards is being able to find people based on skill sets and experience rather than just finding somebody who you know by name. And that's That's also a big change for us. So being able to say, look, I'm after a service or someone who can provide a service or someone who has particular skills, and then being able to find the people close to you in your same building who have that. So in order to, first aid's probably a good example, being able to jump in and say, I have absolutely no idea who the first aid officer is on my floor, but I can quickly put in that I'm searching for first aid, I'm getting back a bunch of people, I'm able to identify those who are in my same building, and then I can get in touch with them directly. We're also using this in a number of business contexts as well in order to pull together people who are involved in mentoring programs or identifying a bunch of graduates or JPs, those kind of things that you've got no idea the name of the person, but you actually need the service that they can provide.
Here's another group of people with defined keywords in their profiles.
Yeah, so Craig mentioned the Smart Grid program before. I think there's a...
And that's because I can't type.
Smart
Live
Grid.
demo.
If you can, just see under that, you can. It is doing the auto-suggest, so the did you mean. Being able to say, look, I need to speak to somebody who's involved in this smart grid thing. I really don't know who I need to talk to, but look, here's a bunch of people. And using the social distance is actually telling Craig that he knows these guys, Rob and David, who are contacts of his, guys who are actually involved in that project. So they're probably two guys that you already have that connection with, Craig. Give either of them a call and they probably point you in the right direction. So a big step for us, moving away from just needing to know the person who has the answer to moving towards being able to search via skill set or attribute and find the people that way. Content search, another big component of ours. We're bringing together not only content that's stored in the Wire, but a number of our other repositories as well. As you can see, we use the type ahead functionality, which is coming with SharePoint. Being able to jump in and look at something to do with sub-transmission. Once again, filters on the left-hand side and our being able to use that best bet functionality and acronyms and jargon busters. In an organisation like ours, probably like most of yours, being able to provide some of those acronyms directly from search results is quite a powerful feature. As you can see across the top, we've got a number of search scopes, which allows us, so there are 70 results here on sub-transmission substations. We can restrict that down and have a look at those that only appear on the Wire or those that actually relate to procedures associated with sub-transmission substation. What we're actually looking at here is this was an interesting component for us to build, is that this is indexing, as Craig mentioned on one of those architecture slides, one of our notes repositories. And this is a notes repository which we know has quite a lot of information which needs to be archived. So there's a project running in parallel in order to clean up that data, but it was important for us to at least improve the experience while that project's still going along. So we put the powerful search engine on top of that, and it really did start to shine that spotlight into that area of into that repository and bring out some of those items that had been obscured and just lurking in the corners. So what we created are two components to help that. One little clock icon, which allows us to highlight to users that the particular document that you're looking at here is older than 2 years old. So it's basically saying, I'm not saying that it is out of date, but I'm not saying that it isn't. It's probably worth considering or checking out the legitimacy of this document and checking whether it is actually the most current version of that. So it's a good way for us to be able to highlight some of those, and also a reporting functionality, which basically says, look, if you know that this item is out of date or you suspect that it is out of date, that we're able to take that back in through a feedback form and start to look at organically starting to clean up some of those documents that need to be archived while this second project's coming along. So a good example of a way in which we didn't necessarily try and achieve everything within our core implementation, but to do some things which made some small improvements or made improvements for our users while recognising that we'll be building on top of this in the future. I think that largely covers off the bits that we wanted to go through in a demo with you. I think Craig's got a few things that he wanted to wrap up.
Thanks, Tyson. So we've had a look at the demonstration. Now we're just looking at some of the experiences of actually doing the job. Some things to be aware of. First of all, partners. Use third-party partners, and make sure that you use them appropriately to overload. So when you're overloaded, when you have a skills shortage that you need to fill, that you actually fill the gaps and bring in the best quality people that are on the market. Data integrity and transparency. A big issue. As you saw, we put a lot of work into the procedures to make sure that we can begin to clean up that environment. The profiles was another area because we amalgamated data from a lot of different sources. We got quite a bit of feedback from users who are saying, "Oh, that's not my photograph," or "I don't have that middle initial," that sort of thing. The data had always been there, but just been obscured. So that sort of was an interesting takeout for us, but we've spent quite a bit of time cleaning up that data. So just be mindful that when that does go live, that you're going to get lots of questions around that. Performance testing, have a system that runs pretty smartly, is great from adoption perspective. The last thing we wanted to hear, having taken the covers off and released this new system was, well, it's really good, but it's very slow. So that was a good thing to get sorted out early and during the development process, and we actually did that a number of times. Some things that we did to support that was, for example, one of our performance tests, we noticed that the homepage was loading very slowly. And so we actually if you remember from the demonstration of the news section, there were a number of tabs. Those tabs that aren't immediately visible are all loaded asynchronously. So that way the user gets a very quick render, and then the rest of the data comes along while they're looking at the page. Tuning the solution, again, we brought in some partners to help with tuning our databases. That was really important for us. And it was also important that when we were doing all this development and design, that you actually configure the system first, don't develop. So the developer who says, "Oh, I can fix that, let me write some code for you," let's just consider the options first. Can we do it using a list? Can we do it in some other way? And that's been really helpful for us as well. Testing. We basically undertook 3 forms of testing. The work stream, so there's the business who was actually defining the solution, they tested the system. They actually became the evangelists for the system as well. So it was important that they had a really good understanding of it, and also that the system actually met all of their initial requirements. Persona testing. Again, that was neutral testing, but again, along each of the personas that we defined to make sure that we were able to meet all of their needs. And then the performance testing that we've mentioned. We used Visual Studio Ultimate, and we scripted all of those tests up, and so we could just run them as often as we needed, and that was a pretty powerful tool. They're all the main key areas. Again, just be careful too. Navigation. We did our own navigation. It's a bit tricky when you sometimes push SharePoint beyond its natural limits. Where it's good, it's brilliant, but if you do, we actually moved the search box out of the navigation bar, out of its normal location. That sort of upset the beast a little bit, so just be careful where you actually push the limits too much on the system. It was interesting actually, also during the change management process, as we got near to launch day, we went off and we demonstrated the system to our help desk team, and we also bringing them on that journey, gave them a series of scripts and keywords and ways of helping them so that when people did ring up and say, "I have a problem with the wire," they actually knew the right answers. And they were really, really appreciative of that, because so often the help desk guys sort of just get left in the dark and someone starts ringing about something and, "Oh, what is this new system that we've been given?" The nice thing about that was that they actually had a really good sense of ownership, and they felt really engaged in the project, so much so that we actually got a call from them on our launch day, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and saying, "The wire, did it go live?" I said, "Yes, it went live, but we haven't had any calls." But they were really invested in the process, so it just goes to show how successful that handover was. And in fact, Tyson's going to talk to you more about some change management.
Yeah, we knew that we had a big journey that we needed to go on with our staff, and taking them from that point where they didn't trust an intranet, they didn't see the value in it, and moving them forward to a place where they had an intranet, which really did help them. So in order to go on that journey, we identified up front that we would take a collection of our business project team, and we said to them, look guys, we need you to look after comms and change management through the project. And so we basically said to them, there's two parts we need to do. You need to look at the outward facing communication of the project throughout the entire life, and then look at the change management activity at and around the time of launch. And it was really important about getting those guys based in the business active in order to do this. And I tell you what, do it they did. This is the kind of thing they eat for breakfast. This team created what I can only describe as the most amazing change management and launch activities that I have ever seen. There was an entire comms plan of techniques and ways in which we really took the name of the wire and we took that creating of a new internet experience out and across the organisation. I'd probably say that there is not a single person across our target user group who didn't know that the wire was coming and didn't know that what it was intended to achieve. We had all kinds of things from floor decals based in different office locations, the wire game, which some of you may have played on the way in, just to generate awareness, through to even on the day of launch, we had a bunch of people acting as lift spruikers up and down some of our main buildings, actually telling people, have you heard about the wire? Did you know that we're going live with the wire today? This is what it does and this is how it's going to help you. And those same lift spruikers then turned into floor walkers. So once we had gone live, that they were going around and speaking to people and speaking to them about their first experience with the wire and really doing that first level support and trying to take those people, especially the skeptics, in that first moment of being able to see the wire and start to convert them into the people who become, to drive that adoption and really start to have that positive first experience rather than remaining as a skeptic and taking that longer journey in terms of becoming an advocate for the product. So really, one of the main reasons I wanted to talk to you about this point is really that it's not an area of project implementation that we as technology people do well. And I don't expect you to, but what I really think that you need to do is to get comms people, to get people across your organisation who really are really good at this stuff and engage them and ask them and get them to run this. And it was a part of the project I really stepped away from, and I'm glad that I did. It was definitely one of the most successful parts about launching our project, and these guys did an amazing job. So don't forget the change management component.
The wire isn't the end of our journey. The project's really given us a platform. And on the platform, basically that's where we're going to start to build up a whole new set of personnel channels and a new way of sharing information across the organisation. Already, in addition to the personas that we have, a mobile persona is beginning to become developed. And so we're looking at then how do people consume information when they're on mobile platforms. We're looking at extending our collaboration, introducing microblogging, more multimedia, interesting video display and presentation and delivery. We're also looking at workflow and how we're going to integrate records into the presence of the wire so that people can access even more information that's relevant to their jobs. And then also making sure that we've got the governance and grooming right so that we continue to enhance the search functionality, that we continue to build depth of knowledge in the way that we use acronyms within the organisation. And that will hopefully then begin to well up and actually create an overall metadata structure for how we access and retrieve information across the company. And my hope is that we actually can do appropriate information harvesting and really then be able to deliver that in a contextual way so that users, when they hit the system, will get the right information for their job at the right time. Tyson's now going to cover you some of the next steps about how to actually push your intranet project forward.
So this is the last thing that I'm going to leave you guys with. A couple of key points that I really want to hammer home. Use personas for ongoing verification. Create them, use them, give them a life, and keep referring back to them. Engage people, both your end users, your people who are going to use your system once you launch that, but also your working group. We have an amazing group of business team who are involved in the project who are some of the most passionate passionate advocates for the platform itself and the way in which it's been used. And these are the same people who, saw little value in an intranet only 12 months ago. So engage both of them. Account for change management, back on that last slide about leveraging the skills that you already have in your organisation and do it throughout your project, and especially at the time of launch. Foster a culture of continuous improvement. We know that we've built a platform and we've built something that we are already looking to improve over time, and creating that across the board. So even with your content owners, about people wanting to improve that content and look at ways in which they can make it easier for the personas to actually understand that and use the platform and its natural strengths. SharePoint 2010 is an amazing platform. It can be pushed a long way. So, but there are areas where if you start to stray away from that, the worn garden path, that you just need to be careful around some of those areas as well. I'd quickly like to invite on stage John Barrett from Microsoft, who's got a few words to say in terms of Microsoft's involvement and the way in which we work together.
Thanks, Tyson. Thanks, Craig. And I'll be very quick. I'm John Barrett. I'm one of my role at Microsoft is as a solution specialist, and I'm not deeply technical, but I do work with customers implementing our productivity platform, SharePoint and Exchange. I had a very small role in this project over a very long period of time. I've been working with these guys for about 3 years, but hopefully I added some value along the way. I sort of wanted to talk about some observations, 2 or 3 quick observations, and some of the ways that solution specialists that might like Microsoft can add value. One of the key questions that came up was, first of all, how do I integrate this with other things? And that kind of leads into what's the difference between SharePoint Standard and SharePoint Enterprise? And it ends up being one of the most crucial questions. And there were lots of discussions that went on between Microsoft and Ausgrid about capabilities between SharePoint Standard and Enterprise, and what are the license differences, and what are the cost implications, and what are the upfront capabilities that you could deploy now versus the way to re-architect that approach if you went standard today versus enterprise in the future. So that's one way that we can help you, is helping you understand the difference between standard and enterprise. Another way that we can help you is on road mapping. So there was a critical meeting that happened about a month before you went live, and the business case justification was going through for some licensing. And one of the questions that management was asking is, so what about all this stuff that we're talking about doing in the future? How is that covered, and what's on the roadmap around things at Microsoft? Stuff that we can't publish at the moment around roadmap, but we can have conversations with customers one-on-one under non-disclosure about roadmaps that might help in some of your investment decisions and discussions. The third way that we can help is basically I can act as a concierge, or people in my roles can act as like a concierge or a traffic cop. I had lots of conversations where the Ausgrid team would come and say, hey, Microsoft, I got this problem, can you help? And I'd say, actually, I can't help, but I know that somebody that can help, either at Microsoft, a partner, a systems integrator, an ISV, another customer. Go and talk to this person. So I'm kind of acting as a bit of a hub in the network around connecting them with other people that could help them solve problems. So at the end of the day, we can sort of be concierges. So I would say, I wanted to sort of leave you with that. The other last thing I'd observe about this project is that the approach that they took in testing, they also took at a macro level, a kind of an iterative sense and respond approach. I saw this happen over a number of years where a business problem would come up. One notes application broke in one instance, and instead of trying to fix the notes application, they said, maybe we'll try and do this in SharePoint. They experimented in SharePoint, had some lessons learned out of that they could later apply to their intranet, and at the same time fixed an immediate business problem. So that iterative approach could really work well at the macro level. So just some last minute thoughts. It's been a pleasure working with these guys. There's some other people in the team like Raymond and Ailey and other people in the team that have also contributed to this project, and I want to thank them for taking the time to present. And I'd also encourage you to think about presenting at TechEd and sharing your stories at TechEd, because these kind of sessions are really, really useful. SharePoint is a product, it's not a solution, and these guys built the solution. So thanks.
Thanks, John.
Happy to open the floor for questions. Yep.
Fantastic talk, guys. Thanks.
Thank you.
Listen, can you talk us through the content
Yeah, we have a collection of probably about 30 to 40 trained content authors. Some are to varying degrees of, I guess, expertise and also amount of content that they own. So some of those guys are definitely updating content daily. Others are more, hey, I will come back and do some more stuff when I need to update these on a 3 or 4 monthly sort of basis. And how that happens, so we have that authoring community. They do it in a content entry environment, which gets migrated across into production. And we do have some workflows that are being put in place for that approval process. We have some workflows for retiring of that content, which actually bring you back into, well, how do we actually make sure that information is kept current and it's reviewed regularly? And then we are still working on a number of other elements around our governance plan as to how does parts of that process come about. Does that sort of answer it, or is there?
No, thanks.
Great. Yep, just in the front.
Yeah, just on a similar topic of that, it seems to me that what you've done is got almost a taxonomy, not really a data taxonomy in place at the moment. You made some comments that you're looking to go and address those taxonomies later in a more formal enterprise content management plan.
Yep.
So how does this link then with other content management systems in the organisation?
Yep.
Bring those together.
Yeah. So the question was about how does the folksonomy that we have pretty much at the moment relate to our more formal taxonomy across the organisation. So it's an evolving thing. What we will probably actually do is we'll be the spearhead, I think, when we actually start to look at enterprise search, and then we'll use that as the mechanism to come forward. Now, because we actually have an extensive search function implemented just out of the box using SharePoint, it gives us the runs on the board, and we'll be able to use that as a driving force. But that experience we'll use to begin to flesh out the rest of the structure.
Yeah, at this stage, we don't have essentially managed organisational taxonomy, which we would have been, I guess, mandated to use across the wire and other systems.
Yeah, but there are several system-based ones, obviously, which we'll need to merge together.
Anyone else?
Down the back.
Now that you guys are live, how are you handling the dev test cycle going forward?
The question was around now that we're in production, how are we handling the dev test release cycle? I'll leave it for Craig.
System was perfect, never have to change it. We basically keep our 4 environments up and running constantly. So unit testing happens on the developer's environment. They then build a package, push it to dev. We then do basic integration tests there, make sure everything's hanging together properly. We then do a package deployment. That same package goes into our staging environment where we do our user acceptance testing, and then when that's all good, we then do a system outage. So we can't, unfortunately, now take SharePoint down as we used to be able to do. There's a formal process we have around that, which is based on the ITIL processes.
There are also those challenges around, obviously, when you have your production versions of content in that content authoring and production environment, and how often you actually bring that content repository back into dev and or staging, and how you manage that process. So actually trying to have that flow of code through dev, staging, production, and content, which is largely created more at the live end of things, and how do you bring that back as you need to?
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, the bit I missed was basically when you're showing your server farms back at the stage, you only had your production stuff there.
That's right, yes.
I wasn't quite sure if they worked well when you were originally developing it, but whether you had those stages below that or not.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, in the centre here.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
This makes sense with what we're doing. We've got the SAP Network platform, 2010, and all the things we put up in trim. My question's around what we found very hard with our project, like the AD information not being up to date, like the fact that when you ask a business user what they do as opposed to looking over their shoulder. We've burnt a lot of our budget in almost like business change and AD and fixing up things that aren't technically an internet project's problem, but the internet project won't succeed unless you fix them. How do you handle that side of the problem?
in terms of repeating that question, I don't know where I should start. I guess the crux of it comes down to the question was largely around there are lots of project activities which are non-technical, and they're largely around organisational change, fixing other systems that you're going to use, and then there are technical implementation parts that you need to do. Now, I guess the question is more about how do you manage the budgets of those and where you spend the effort. Is that a reasonable paraphrasing?
It's around the fact that, like, that's not your problem.
Yeah.
It was already existing.
Yeah.
Somehow you have to make your budget accommodate fix next, you won't succeed.
Yeah, look, it's definitely the case. Really valid point. And I think that even since going live, some of the pain that we have experienced is it's pulling down some reflection on the wire, which are really not the wire's problems. So people are saying, if they're having a bad experience around people search because information is wrong, actually not understanding that this information isn't the wire's problem. It's the fact that this AD system or the way that we store information in our security system or Lotus Notes has always been out of date. And it's the fact that we haven't, that information has never really seen the light of day in that format, that, when we're pulling it into the wire, that yes, these are some of the pain points that we're having. How are we addressing it? We did have very much those two streams, both the business stream who were really trying to address some of those problems, and then the implementation. We worked reasonably closely with some of those stakeholders in the Notes and SAP realms about trying to say, look, guys, we are going to expose some of this information, and we're going to be able to consume that, or we need to consume that. So how do we do it and try and have good data quality? There's probably no short answer. Yes, it's a challenge, and it is quite difficult on how do you spend your effort and budget fixing things that aren't really your problem.
So to add a little to that, some of those elements we just completely bypassed. We put our own scrubbing in, for example, when we were building our profile data, and when we do our AD refresh, I'll probably sell our database back to them. So we'll have a positive budget in that respect. And then other elements is literally getting the evangelists out there, and actually it's the change management again, is that having people who understand why something may not be right and being able to communicate that amongst their teams and on their floor as well.
The last point on that is that we're not fixing those issues in SharePoint. We really are going back to those source and getting that information updated in each of those systems and pulling it in correctly the second time around. So that's been an important part about us helping them cleanse their data rather than us just fixing it in the wire and putting a little band-aid over the top. So yeah, it has been a process in trying to improve some of that data externally as well.
There was another question just in front of you. No?
There we go. Just here.
So our ECM strategy is still...
The question was?
Oh, sorry. The question is about document management and other repositories. So our ECM strategy is basically saying that all records need to live in trim. So that's fine and dandy, and that's got some great classifications around the retention cycle of those documents. But they are records. The live documents actually live in our collaboration space at the moment. And as we move all of our collaboration space onto the same farm, that'll become visible and available, those documents, under the same search engine. So we'll get a more unified picture around all of that. And then, John actually has some other views around that from a technology perspective.
Yeah, I won't talk about what Ausgrid are doing because they've got their own plans, but just in general, the audience should be aware that with Trim 7.1, HP has released a new and better, a lot better actually, integration between SharePoint 2010 and Trim. So grab me afterwards because I'm the guy at Microsoft that kind of owns the Trim SharePoint problem, challenge, issue.
But yeah, specifically that integration is something that we will be looking at improving over time. There's not a great level of integration between SharePoint, the wire component, and our records management system, but it is something that we'll look at doing. Just behind you there.
Probably a less technical question. You developed personas based on what people are currently doing.
Yep.
Do you think that was influenced by the previous system, and maybe you need to revisit the personas with the new systems and new workflows?
Yeah, really interesting question. One which basically was wrapped around when we created the personas. We did that using the way that they currently consume information using our existing systems, and will that change, or should we redo those now that we have new systems in place? They would have been an element of existing system, but probably more importantly to consider is that I would have said that a lot of the eNet content that was in there wasn't used. So they were using alternate systems. They were looking in filing cabinets. They were turning around and grabbing something that's, a printed something that's on their desk. So I would probably say that there weren't a lot of ingrained habits of how to get information through the existing eNet. So it was more about that whole where do you get the information you need for your job, and probably was only a small element of being based around how do you use the existing intranet. Should we revise them? Look, I think that if we the intention is to keep these personas alive and to use them through future stages of our projects, look at them in light of how those people may address collaboration or advanced search, those kind of things. So I think that it would be a valuable exercise to revise them and revisit whether a lot of those same intentions, goals and the way that they interact are still valid.
I think I mentioned earlier, we actually have a new persona on the way for mobile users, so they are actually seen by the organisation as living documents. And to your point, I actually had a meeting with a business manager just recently who was very proudly telling me that he could now retire half a dozen Excel spreadsheets that he had because he could now find the information that he needed. So that was sort of a nice thing.
Just in the front.
For records management and drawing management, do you use Streamman, the search in SharePoint? Or?
No, they're separate systems at the moment.
But do you link it to SharePoint?
No, separate systems.
I think that's about it. Thank you very much for coming, and we're going to be around for a while, so if you do have any specific questions, feel free to come and grab us. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.